Hey guys, this is Jake from the Cutting Mechanics, and this is my tutorial on my favorite cut. My favorite cut is the Inazuma cut. Basically what it is a downward diagonal, an upward diagonal, then a downward diagonal one more time. But the key to this cut is speed, because you should be able to complete this cutting pattern within 1 second. But it's not actually speed, it's rather your transition technique. Okay? So let's take a look at what I'm talking about. For this cutting pattern, basically how it should look like is something like this. Downward diagonal, upward diagonal, downward diagonal. Simple, right? But like I said, this cutting pattern should be completed within 1 second. So 3 cuts within 1 second. So the key to that is not speed, because if you're focused on speed, you would have a really fast cut, and then you would have a slow transition because you're fighting all that momentum, then another fast cut, then another fast cut, but with slow and really clumsy transitions. That's not a good thing in my opinion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you guys a certain transition technique. I call it the pivot technique. So what you're doing is, when you're going for that first transition from downward diagonal to upward diagonal, right? So the pivot technique is this. Towards the tip of the sword, you're going to focus on one spot in which you would like to pivot the sword around. Okay, let me show you what I mean. When I go for a downward diagonal, and I cut the target, right here I'm going to pivot the sword at this spot. So what I do is I turn my wrists and I move my wrists, and you can see how I'm pivoting the sword in that position. Okay? So go from a downward diagonal to an upward diagonal, and I use that pivot technique. And the good thing about this pivot technique is that since it's really smooth, or should be really smooth, there's a lot less strain done to your arms and your body in general. So that way, when you're cutting and you're going with fast speed, all you have to do is do a simple transition at the pivot point, and your body won't really be able to tell that you're changing directions. So all of it relies especially in your wrists and your arms and shoulders. Okay, obviously you will be using your body as well, so you're engaging your core, your hips, your legs. So let me show you what I'm talking about. When I go for the downward diagonal, I cut the target, then I transition. You notice how I'm turning my hips, my upper body, and I'm also engaging my legs to help me gain some more power behind the cut when I'm going for the upper diagonal, and then same thing for that transition to the downward diagonal. Okay, so let me show you really slowly how it should look like. 1, 2, 3. Okay, you notice that there's extremely smooth transitions there, and my body didn't really feel anything. It couldn't really tell that there was a change in direction, and obviously there is no sudden shock to my body when I'm trying to switch direction. Say I'm trying to flip over my wrist like this, then all of a sudden if I cut and flip over my wrist like that, then all of a sudden your body's going to be thrown around by the weight of the sword. So that's obviously inefficient. So when I do the pivot technique, the cuts become much smoother and the entire pattern becomes much more fluid. Now one note that I would like you guys to take note of is, notice that when I do the pivot transition, I'm transitioning right about when my sword is parallel to the ground, or about horizontal. I'm not transitioning with my sword way down here. I'm transitioning with the sword up here. Okay, so that may be something that some of you guys have to get used to, but the key to this cutting pattern is the transition, but practicing the transitions slowly and slowly getting to master them and really becoming comfortable with them is more important than just trying to speed cut your way through. Alright, so the technique is much more important. So when I'm cutting, I cut, and when my sword is about horizontal, then I pivot, okay, cut, and then same thing with the upward cut. I'm not transitioning way up here. I just have to move right about here, right? So maybe the tip of the sword is going to be a little bit higher than your head level. Then just transition and do the last downward diagonal cut. Okay, so let me show you one more time slowly this cutting pattern. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so like I said, this cutting pattern should be done in under 1 second. So let me show you real time how it should look like. Okay, you saw that 1, 2, 3. I was moving almost full speed, but my arms don't really have too much strain done to them. Okay, so I could go ahead and do this same cutting pattern for an extended period of time without having too much strain to my body. Okay, so let's go see an actual cutting example of how it should look like. Okay, so that was my cutting tutorial for my favorite cut, the Inazuma cut. And I hope you guys found it interesting or maybe even entertaining. And if you guys learned from it, then great. Alright, so this is Jake from the Cutting Mechanics, and thank you for watching, and as always, cut safe and have fun.